everyone, and welcome to The Trek. The Trek is a Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions on topics that are too often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we venture together into complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. I'm Madison, I'm a high school senior from Fergus, Oklahoma, joined by some of our community members, and today we are running an experiment. We have an essay that we all read called Democracy on Life Support by Lee Drutman, and we're just going to see how this goes in terms of like reflecting on the content, having conversations about what was salient to us, and we'll see what happens. And so we're still going to start off with the word association. So when you see your name on the screen, go ahead and give an introduction and the 1 to 3 words that you associate with the essay.
So Sheng said he wouldn't be able to make it, 12:30 at this time. Welcome.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. So basically what happened, I thought I probably wouldn't be able to make it, but then basically, I mean, it's okay if you have like other people plan.
No, it's great.
That
well, welcome.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, let's get started.
Okay, cool. Hey everyone, my name is Ashley. I'm 17 from Vancouver, Washington. And my word association is can you come back to me?
Yeah.
All right, I can go next. Hi, my name is Chabu. I am 19 and based out of Toronto and a first year at U of T. And this article really spoke to the idea of multifaceted compromises. So he was kind of just, a lot of it just kind of broke down some of the challenges we're facing as a democracy. And there was just so many layers in which we have been compromised, in which we're not operating to the best of our ability. So multifaceted compromise is my word of association.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia, I'm 23 years old, and I would say my word would just be balance and variety, taking from a lot of different thought processes and systems in order to create a balanced and well-oiled machine, I guess is the way to put it.
Hi everyone, my name is Angel, 18, yeah, that's how old I am, from Maryland, and okay, I have the same issue as Ashley. I have a lot of words going around in my head right now because it's like a long article, but I think my word association would be a living a living system, borrowed heavily from like the common moniker of the Constitution as being a living document. That grows and adapts to, I guess, the way the culture progresses. And I think just having that, just knowing that democracy in and of itself is not stagnant is a really important piece of understanding if we're going, to continue on this experiment in a way that benefits the majority. Yeah, so a living system.
Hi, my name's Ilina. I'm 17 years old, and for my word association, I'd have to say systemic change and hopefulness. Mainly because to me the article, as it is reimagining the great political experiment, the word reimagining to me just gives a sense of hope, as if that reimagination works, then for the better, then it works.
Hey everybody, I'm Rashank. I'm 14 and I'm based out of Central India. And I read this article pretty recently. And while I don't know too much about American democracy, I can draw some parallels to democracy around the world. I think something that comes a thought that comes into my mind reading this article would be deliberate.
Okay. I'm just gonna say,
Have to
like,
be more deliberate going into the future.
oh, sorry, I did not mean to interrupt.
Okay, wait, can you hear me? Because I was saying some stuff, but it just stopped.
Yeah. Couldn't hear you for a while there.
I'm really sorry. The Wi-Fi is kind of unstable here.
No, it's all good. Did you have any other words?
No, yeah, just deliberate. That's pretty much it.
Okay.
Okay. I'm just gonna say, like, ongoing conversation, because I think what I really took away from the article was that, like, I don't know, it's like so much of it is kind of just striking that balance between like how like what is the responsibility of like the people to make decisions versus like how much of the decisions should be like institutionalized and like a product of like systems that like I don't know. I guess like I just like I think there are a lot of components of things that are evolving, and it seems to me that like the most important thing is just to ensure that there is dialogue, constant dialogue among all of the parties.
There's a lot of words I could say, but I'd say like power of concepts, because like the concept of complex majoritarianism is like a word that speaks to very complex things happening in a democracy. And so, you know, we're gonna be, you don't create new concepts, you're stuck with like very simplistic political philosophy of like, you know, we need to elect a better leader, right? We need to elect, if only we were able to get more seats, you know, in the House and Senate, like, you know, you need language that actually maps onto reality.
Yeah, and I would say breakthrough or collapse, just because our democracy, our organizing system, like just like heavily dictates and influences our lives, and change is inevitable within the system. If you even think about like the essay articulated that America almost used to be kind of like a four-party system, and then it transitioned into like a very polarizing two-party system. And so if we know that change is inevitable, we've gotten to a point where we can either have a breakthrough or a collapse with the system. But yeah, thank you all for sharing that. Now we can hop into the conversation. Does anyone have a question or provocation they want to get started with?
Yeah, and this is unusual, but I'm going to send this link around, and don't just paste randomly, but we'll still have a flow. But if you have a provocation where we can just copy and paste it, and then Madison can just format it on her own, that's probably the easiest. Here's one to start. Democracy is a permanent management task involving competing values and tension. So let's start with that.
Can I step in?
Yeah, of course.
To that point, mainly the point where it says involving competing values and tension. I think even though I fully agree with that statement, I don't think there always has to be competing values in a democracy. I think there are a few common values that each one of us holds, no matter our political party. And I think the important thing is in a democracy that we don't see issues party-based, but we see issues as just like human issues and issues that affect everyone, no matter what party you're in. So I think I think although it does involve competing values and tension, and particularly in the last 4 years, I think that has definitely come to light. I think the point that I'm trying to say is that I don't think it was always like this.
I think Ilina brings up a really interesting point, actually. Somewhere in the article, what's his name? What's his name? I'm so sorry. The author talks about how like there's a kind of a general consensus with what we consider our policy issues. So I think he says specifically that we're left of center typically when it comes to economic issues, and I guess like right of center, whatever, when it comes to social issues. And I think that's so interesting because it seems as if like in the general sense, we're all at a consensus, but the different parties play on different aspects of that consensus in order to increase polarization and therefore gridlock. But cycling it back to the original provocation, I completely agree, but I think that it's a matter of the extent of the tension, and whether or not the values that we are competing against or that are being put to, I guess, that are facing off against each other are truly what the country thinks are values that are, I guess, mutually exclusive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, is it okay if I step in here? If I cut out, just send a message in the chat. That's gonna be helpful. Yeah, I definitely agree with Angel, and this reminds me of this quote by I'm forgetting who the person was, but there's this really good quote about it says America is a one-party state, but in typical American extravagance, they have two of them. So that kind of relates to how she said the
Oh, can't hear you.
Cliffhanger. Kind of in response to both Angel and Ilina, I think it's I think the reason why it feels like it's well, historically it's been so much about competing values is because we have framed politics that way. I think if we made it, if we centered our politics based on figuring out how to increase human flourishing for everyone, it would be about complementary values, like stuff like freedom and security. They can be like, you know, certain policies can maximize security over freedom, at least on certain time horizons. And so I mean, I guess it's interesting that Ashley brought up that there needs to be a lot more dialogue, and I obviously totally agree. And it's interesting that political scientists don't really talk that much about it, and they do frame it very much in terms of competition, because they're looking at what's already happening, right? But that doesn't have to be just that's not like a I don't think that's a law of physics, right? That it just has to be a very tense, like combative type of dynamic. But in order to reframe politics, you need to have so much cultural influence, right, to do so, right? So that's what I'll caveat it with.
If I can just say something, Gary, your last point about culture, I think it's important that that the inclusion of cultures includes all cultures and not kind of just the summed up culture of one party, because I guess throughout democracy, we've seen kind of traditional, I guess, stereotypes placed upon political parties. And I think those traditional stereotypes almost become a culture for the party. However, not everyone in the party may kind of align with those stereotypes, but they are in the party because they most closely align with those stereotypes or with the views that the party holds. So I think that if we're discussing cultures and democracy, we have to take into consideration all cultures and all backgrounds, and that everyone has a different story. And the party story is not necessarily an individual story. However, the party story may be made up of many individual stories.
Is it okay if I know I kind of got cut out before, but another point I wanted to mention was I definitely agree with the permanent management task kind of aspect of it. Um, I feel like it's really important to have a free flow of information. So there are always new ideas to challenge the establishment. And they don't always need to be good ideas, but they just need to be something uh, that forces democracy to constantly evolve and not just stay stagnant. Like in a lot of places where authoritarian governments take hold, it's because the people aren't questioning the current system as much. Maybe it's because they don't have access to information, or maybe it's because of other reasons. But yeah, that's something I feel is really important.
I think that looking at the term, like it's a role of management, is super important. Just because when I think of American politics and where it stands right now, I see politicians playing the role of like introducing new tensions or like framing current situations and narratives so that it's the core purpose is like our competing values. They almost introduce new competing values rather than helping resolve the tensions of the ones that exist among the people already. And so that's in direct contradiction with what their role should actually be.
Anyone else have something to add or another provocation, question they want to pose?
If I can step in, I'm not sure if this would be a point or another provocation, but quite early on in the article, there's a quote that I kind of want to bring up that says, "We all agree on everything." So essentially it starts out saying no candidate or party has ever run a successful campaign on the slogan, "We all agree on everything, and we are all equally competent, so it doesn't matter who you choose." However, I think particularly that statement has to do with the unsaid slogan that was discussed before about kind of party generalization, and kind of how even though no campaign is run on that slogan, that's still a slogan that's kind of indirectly, I guess, throughout the party, particularly I guess if we're using examples, particularly possibly in the Republican Party in the last 4 years, it's become very generalized. Although there are people throughout the party who believe many different things, but are there for the core values. But outside of the core values, their values maybe differ from another person. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make is kind of reiterating the generalization of, or kind of the dangers of generalizing a party. And I thought that quote really strengthened the point.
So I'll just I guess in my response is a quote also in that section, which I'll just copy and paste. Elections have to be about something, so the supreme power in democratic politics is the power to define what these elections are about. And this, it's cool because I don't know how much he says that Lee talks about the word narrative, or like, but I mean, it's clearly so relevant to all of this. I mean, this actually relates to another quote that I wanted to to highlight. There seems to be a lot of themes here. Politicians are not superhumans capable of rafting upstream against a raging river, right? You don't want your job like with limited time and access to media. If you're just kind of a typical politician, you're not going to both be able to make a name for yourself and push down your opponents while also reframing what the purpose of politics is. Because who the fuck are you? So how do you blame people for playing the game that's the only game in town, right? Otherwise, you have to have so much power to change what the game is about.
That's something that I felt like I finally understood after watching Obama be president. Simply because like he was someone in my, like as the first Black president, he was obviously like idolized in like my community and my family and etc. And so like I learned a lot about his personal story just sheerly based on like exposure. And so genuinely I do think he's a good person. But as I got older and like learned more about like what he did as president, I think the role, like it's just no matter who is in office and who has that role, you cannot be a good person and a good president, or a good person and a senator, because those roles are contingent on doing something bad, if that makes sense. Like it's almost in the job description to compromise core values or place American lives over like any and all other lives. So like the job requires that level of compromise. So who are we to even be upset with the people who take on the job? Because it's not really their fault that that's literally what the job requires of them based on the political system that we've drafted for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chabu. I, like a couple years ago, I had the opportunity to speak to this really amazing activist who's been holding like the longest vigil outside of the White House protesting militarism. And I asked him whether or not he thinks that like someone entering off that like a political office who wants to make a genuine change will be able to do so, or put simply, are there any good politicians? And he was so vehement with his answer. He was like, no, absolutely not. For the exact reason, for the exact same sentiments that the quote that Gary brought up brings, right? You can really try to do everything in your willpower to, I guess, enact policies that are truly beneficial for the populace. But when you literally have every single thing in the system working against you, not only within like the scope of the office, but also the culture, with hyperpolarization that's extremely present in the media. And if you do try to play both sides of the aisle or compromise across both sides of the aisle, you're demonized by your party. For instance, let's look at Mitt Romney, everyone who voted to impeach Trump, right? They're like, a lot of them are very scared because of the fact that their political careers might not necessarily have that longevity anymore. Or back, how many years ago? I don't remember time. But when Susan Collins was afraid to vote to impeach him the first time, once again, because she was afraid of losing that political stronghold in Maine. There's so much outside of just the system of politics that's working against actors who actually want to do good. And it's really sad that we have such a system. I don't know.
And another oh wait, who was just
go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say you can go, but thank you. So another point made that goes really well with this point is like politicians, especially presidents, have been campaigning as outsiders for decades, because obviously what the American people want is for special interests to go out the window and for our leaders to work on behalf of us. But then it comes to these lifelong politicians, they're least likely to respond to new information because they're most like ingrained in these pre-existing beliefs. So no matter how much they push that they're for the American people and getting rid of special interests, they've been involved in it for years, and it's hard to go outside of it.
I think there's another quote based on what has been said that really stands out. And I think it's the idea of if we have a president or a senator or congressperson who doesn't have bad intention, who's aiming to do good, but because of the description of the job, like I think Chabu was saying this, because of the description of the job and what the job entails, I think it's not exactly it definitely causes conflicts among voters. And a quote that really caught my eye during this discussion was, if elections involve eliminating conflict in order to give voters choices, then do the elections really resolve the conflicts based on what the voters choose? If the president is continuously, I guess, as Chabu said, contingent on doing bad things.
Is it a step in for a bit? I especially want to focus on the second part of the quote that says, it doesn't matter who you choose. And obviously no party has ever run a successful campaign on this slogan, but I think sometimes we forget how it really doesn't matter whom you choose. In this way, politics is kind of like sports, where two teams might be on the ground and they're doing everything they can to beat each other at the game. But outside of the stadium, they're like best friends, and they do everything together. They're part of the same core group of like people. They're in a separate class, and so it's all about them trying to convince us that they stand for different beliefs, while in reality they're gonna do the same changes as their opponent would do. So I feel like that's something people don't recognize too often.
I think something else to add on to that point is that our similarities don't necessarily define our differences, and our differences don't necessarily define our similarities. Like as Rishank was saying, if like sports is a really good example of that. Like competitiveness exists on the field, and maybe as rival sports competitiveness, but as soon as you get out of that stadium, there may still be a bit of friendly competition there, but no one holds a grudge. No one kind of keeps it with them that maybe they lost. I think the similarities definitely outweigh the differences. Like they have so much in common. They're on a sports team. They're both sports players. It doesn't, I think in that case, the similarities, I guess, don't necessarily define their differences. I guess whether the outcome is good or bad.
I think the difference between soccer or whatever and politics is that people know that the game is messed up, and that the game, like their objective is to play it still to the best of their ability, which is destroy the other side, and suppress independent voters and third parties and stuff like that. And so they're actually completely disincentivized to humanize the other side. So just want to make sure that we're not kind of asking our elected officials to do what is like raft upstream against the raging river.
And to go back to the overarching quote, Gary's overarching quote about like conflict definition, I thought that was such like a subtle but extremely important point. And I guess it kind of reminded me what like we're doing here with human flourishing, like the whole movement, and the necessity of having not necessarily outsiders, but people who are true stakeholders and don't really have any skin in the game other than like their lives, right? Defining and pointing out and defining what we actually need to be focusing on as a collective. When you have politicians defining the problem, I think it's so important to look at like, where is the money flowing from? If the money is flowing from the people, then the problems that the politicians are defining are going to be problems that directly affect people and problems that need to be solved in order to make these people's lives better. But if we have big corporate lobbyists funding these politicians, these problems aren't going to reflect the everyday problems of regular people, but rather the problems of, I guess, the corporatocracy, right? And I don't know, it's so interesting how essential conflict definition is. And it didn't click. Definitely a paradigm shift after reading like that one quote that you put down. So
I definitely agree a lot with, oh, sorry, go ahead if someone else.
No, I just wanted to like react to what Angel said really quickly. I can't find the quote, but it really comes down to the fact that like the people in charge don't feel the implications of their failures. Like they're very far removed from the backlash or like what happened. So they can almost like I like the baseball analogy, like they can actually treat it as a game, because to them, like the outcomes have no serious repercussions. And that's so concerning because the things that happen on those Senate floors and in the House are the distinction between life and death in so many instances for people. So no, I think that was like a really important point and definitely connects to the overarching quote here.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. One thing that Angel did bring up, and it's really weird when you think of it from an external perspective, because we've just come to accept it as normal. But something I find really surprising is how there are all these huge summits and climate summits and water access summits and so many different summits that international organizations conduct. But it's always these world leaders representing their countries, and those people don't really have, now as Angel said, they don't have skin in the game. They're going to be just fine whether climate change is solved or not, and they don't really care whether the average person in the country has access to electricity or water. So yeah, we don't really have uh, those people who are actually affected by these issues talking about it. And I feel that needs to start at the grassroots level.
It's really interesting.
I have a question on that. I'm not sure if it's just because of my naivety, but why would politicians campaign on something that they're not gonna uphold, especially if they know that if they get elected, citizens are essentially trusting those politicians with their lives, and to uphold the what's written in the Constitution.
Because they can blame other people for why it doesn't get done. That's why. It's very simple. And also how they got elected was blaming other people for the current lack of flourishing. So they can keep that up. It's a very reliable narrative.
Yeah, I also like the quote that I had here. It's hard to think long term when persistent winner take all elections hinge on short term performance. I think it's like people are just incentivized to say what sounds good in the short term, whether or not they can actually make it happen. I mean, people are so used to that in politics. All right, now I kind of want to pose a question that hinges on like his overarching argument. Just basically like, what is your take on his solution of the multi-party system?
I mean, it's hard to be against it. I think the question that people probably have is like, how do you make it happen when there's no interest by the people in power to make that happen, right? So there's a direct, like even if like someone theoretically, if they weren't elected, would be like, oh yeah, all these proposals make sense. If you are elected as the single representative of your district, Lee wants multiple representatives for a lot of districts. Why would you want to share power? And if you got elected by, like, a common complaint about elections is that it like partisan primary voters basically select the eventual winners, you probably won't win if the elections are more democratic. So how do you actually transition over to a world where the conditions, like there already needs to be like a momentum in the democracy reform movement in order to get to the more extreme reforms that he is hoping for.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Gary, another downfall of a multi-party system is in terms of like the transition. Even if you were to somehow be able to get a third party that had, you know, a decent following, like, and you were able to make that happen, that third party, because the two-party system, would have to corrupt itself in order to survive, because of the way that our politics is structured now. And so I just see like a transition would be super difficult, if not just like literally impossible and just not feasible.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree with that because right now it feels like everybody is engaged in this kind of, it feels like a contest really, where we're supposed to beat the other side, and we don't really know what the quote unquote other side is, but that's just what we're supposed to be. So it's this negative feedback loop where the other side is doing this, so we step up and engage in more extremist policies. So that kind of defaults to a two-party system because there are only two.
There's definitely like vivid disconnect in terms of like the idea and praxis, like how do you put it into play? And the only real, like what Madison said, like the third party would have to corrupt itself in order to survive, which is like so disheartening to hear. And so the only way to like make that possible would be to institutionalize it. Like it would have to be a law, it'd have to be a new way of operating. That would have to be the standard operating procedure across the board for something like that to thrive and actually take place, which circles back to the whole idea though of like the only people who can institutionalize it are a very select few who wouldn't be interested in doing so, which makes it really concerning because if the pathway to institutionalizing it is compromised, then what are the other pathways to making something like that a permanent feature of our democracy? Like there needs to be, I know we have checks and balances, but I don't think they extend to the idea of we need more pathways to institutionalize things.
Heavily agree with you, Chabu. And I think that's my one reservation about this entire piece. He like restricts his discussion on culture to like a few sentences, and I feel like sure, what is this called, a complex majoritarian system will be beneficial, but if that's the only isolated I guess reform that you're going to make to democracy, it's definitely like the ails of what we're experiencing now are inevitable. And it's so funny because I think he points out, I'll find the quote and put it in the chat later, but he points out that someone Klein's discussion on how the American people know what policies are best for them is faulty because there have been multiple studies to disprove that because of polarization, et cetera, et cetera. But he still falls to that same critique. If we're really going to be able to have a functioning multi-party system, like he points out in New Zealand or in Ireland, then we're going to need to have those checks and balances. And I think that the quote unquote fourth pillar of democracy, the media, should function as that check, as that fundamental check and balance. But it's not currently right now because the same people who pull the strings of the politicians are also funding copious amounts of money into these media organizations in order to continue these toxic narratives that emphasize this us versus them mentality that we're all working under. And I think I'm just overall a little bit disappointed that he didn't go more into that towards the conclusion of his paper or of his essay. But yeah, a multi-party system is definitely not the solution to curing demagoguery and populism.
Well, it's more like it's hope of like what the future could look like. It's more like a vision, right? Versus like a like proposal. But again, that still leads us to ask, how do we get to that vision? And culture has everything to do with that, right? Like changing narratives, like at the most like the widest scales, right? And that's not his expertise, which is great, because then, you know, it's kind of, I think it's actually a lot of it is up to us to think about how do we create that sort of demand for reform type politicians, and get just to Ru Sheng's point, we need grassroots energy that is calling for this exponentially more, honestly, than we have today.
Yeah, well, I mean, well, I would say we don't even need to like create the demand or anything. I think people are yearning for like something different. Like it's pretty clear to see that what we have right now is not working. So we have the demand. I guess we just need to like create a shared vision for what a better future looks like and figure out a way to get there.
I also think that, oh, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I also think that the vision that needs to be created of a collective bipartisan narrative. I think the struggle for getting there is that currently, if we hear something that we don't approve of or we don't believe in, the legitimacy and the authority of that point is completely disregarded. And I think in order to reach the proposed solution, the narrative needs to be a two-way path that where each and every person and each and every idea brought forward gets discussed, gets thought about, is legitimate, and isn't just completely downplayed because, for instance, the person may not be from the same political party, or the person who suggested the idea may not agree with your views, or maybe you had history with that person. It doesn't matter. In order to create this proposed solution, it needs to be a two-way path where we can listen to one another. I think the concept of listening to create a solution to people on the other side of the aisle has really become lost, particularly in the last, I guess, 5 years, actually, from the beginning of, I think, 2015. The idea of listening to someone that has completely different views than you is lost, because we're all looking at these issues from a party perspective. Whereas if we look at these issues from just a human perspective, saying that, for example, the issue of security, everyone wants to feel safe. Everyone wants that security blanket on them, the security knowing that they're safe in their everyday life. And I think the difference between getting to that issue is that everyone has different perspectives, but we can definitely get to a solution if everyone just listens to each other, well, and either adds on or maybe debates perspectives. But we can't continue just ignoring people that aren't from the same party or same ideas as us.
And Chabu, did you have something to add?
Yeah, it was more in relation to like the overarching question. It's like, what's your take on his proposed solution? From the beginning of the article, I was a little hesitant to adopt the language of like a loop, which is kind of used throughout the entire article. And the reason being is that like a loop kind of insinuates like a singular circle with like a few components that feed into each other. And that didn't feel reflective of just like looking at systems in a really overarching way. And like Angel said, when you look at it from a loop, you miss components of like culture that influences that loop and how it connects to a few other competing perspectives. But having finished the article and throughout this conversation, I think that it's appropriate to refer to this as a loop because it kind of isolates one singular component of the system that needs to be addressed, and isolating the situation and focusing in on like one component makes it easier to address a systems issue in a way that's like directly effective, because you're not trying to solve all the competing parts of the system. You're trying to address one part that should support the other parts of the system that we're kind of trying to address. So I think that I see the role of the article is not necessarily to suggest to like fix all of democracy in whole, but to address a really important loop within that system. And so visualizing it that way makes the kind of role of the solution a little bit more clear. And so I wouldn't even like look at it to seek out, oh, like how does this integrate culture and like narratives and history and marginalized communities? Because in reality, it's really just a criticism on how we can handle the more bureaucratic elements of democracy better, not democracy as a whole.
Great point.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to add on to Ilina's kind of two-way conversation thing. I feel like right now there's a culture of tribalism where instead of like ideally we'd form our own opinions independently and then choose the party that represents us best. But right now it's more of we choose the party first and then we mold our beliefs onto what they want us to think. So it's kind of the reverse of what we should be doing. So that's kind of a tribalism that's taking hold, not just in the US, but across a lot of the modern world.
I think the article is definitely, as Chabu said, it definitely does not address all the problems, but I think the solution it's trying to create is kind of setting a ground level for what the author thinks the solution should be. And I think each and every individual should take that and interpret that in their own way, because the only way we're going to come with a solution is, as I said before, if people from different walks of life come together with their shared experiences and shared beliefs, throw them all in one pot, and then what comes out is a solution that involves many different cultures, many different beliefs, and many different political ideologies.
All right. Gary, what do you think? Do you think this conversation deserves to be continued, or should we hop into a reflection?
Reflection.
Okay, cool. Just a second here. I'm gonna send the notes in the chat. Okay. All right, I'll be honest. I normally have my reflection ready, but I wasn't even prepared this time.
Let me add on to what Sheng and others were saying.
Okay.
So there's a quote I highlighted, which I really liked. Oops, the heck. If there are only two teams and the other team is by definition always wrong, what is there to think about? We're not incentivized to actually think clearly about things. It's just.
I think my reflection is both a request and a proposal. First of all, like reading this and having a conversation around it was really, really incredible, because it kind of forced further exploration. Like, oh, now I have this new understanding. What do I do with it is usually the follow-up thought. And so I think that it was awesome that we kind of focused on a particular piece and reflected on it. But I'm wondering if, just in direct reaction to what Gary just said, if there are only two teams and the other team is by definition always wrong, what is there to think about? I'm wondering if we can source out an article that is almost like a source from the other team and genuinely spend time thinking about it and reacting to it. I think that'd be really cool, because it's hard to have constructive, informative conversations around ideologies or parties that you don't necessarily agree with. So to deal with like a piece of writing and kind of look at it with a holistic perspective, I think that that'd be an awesome challenge to propose to this group.
Yeah, that seems like a great practice, part of a good process, right, for anyone to adopt. That like you're self-aware about your biases, and try to, in good faith, analyze and discuss um, pieces of content ideas that don't immediately jive with your worldview. It's great.
I guess I can go ahead and share mine. Like another thing, it's quite obvious that I think we established in this conversation that we can't expect politicians to make the real change that we need, because I mean they're playing against the rules of the game when they're doing that. And I guess it's just become even more salient to me all the problems that currently exist with trying to change and disrupt the system. I mean, if you think about it, because political parties, the two parties, are like so deeply rooted in people's like identity, people rely on political parties to do a lot of thinking for them. So without political parties, like it forces people to actually decide like what they value and what they believe in beyond what is prescribed by the party. So like that's just another huge obstacle that hadn't came to mind before. Um, so I don't know. I guess in a way that's like, I don't know, still processing that, but I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think that we should do something like this again in the future.
I guess I can go next. I really agree and think it would be cool what Chabu suggested. Because I guess if we want to come up with a solution and a proposal that will work and that's effective, as I said before, I think it's important that we use the diversity of all cultures to strengthen the solution. And it's important to look at this with an open mind, look at all sides and reflect everybody through this, so that even though mainly because even though proposals may be non-binding, um it will, if people see themselves reflected, if people see relatability reflected into a proposal or a situation, they're more likely to go for it because they understand it, even if they don't necessarily agree with the overall point. If there's something that catches their eye that they can relate to, or someone in their family, a loved one, can relate to, then it'll definitely stand out more to them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about the politics of the solution. It just needs to be about us coming together as human beings who all share the common goal of seeing an issue that needs to be solved.
What this article and the discussion had me thinking is like the American, like in terms of all of our opinions aren't represented within the two-party system. I was talking about, like economic issues and social issues and how where the majority of Americans lie when it comes to both of those. There's no party that represents the bundle that the majority of Americans have. Sorry, I cannot talk right now. But basically we need to create that path.
I think this conversation really had me thinking about how a lot of these problems are exacerbated by the digital world we live in. So, for example, tribalism has always been part of the human experience, but in the modern world, it has become possible to just stay in an echo chamber surrounded by only your own views. So that's something that a lot of the challenges have been exacerbated by our environment. But at the same time, we also have more avenues for solutions. It's so much easier to take grassroots initiatives and start building up your vision of democracy. You can interact with other people on social media and start a movement like so many others we've seen around the world. So yeah, I feel like a lot of the conversations are going to be unique to the digital era, and we need to focus on how we can best use its benefits to, in our conversation.
Yeah, I think two things just keep on coming back to me. I think just the first one is this conversation is just showing me that, like, elections are the game rules, is, the process by which we choose who gets to decide what the game is. And so because of that, like, electoral reform is really the first step in creating any type of change. And I guess, like, to that point, like, elections are how politicians get to paint their story. Like, it is how they control the narrative, and so whoever controls elections gets to control the narrative. And I think that just, like, became really clear to me. And the other thing was to, like, Alina's point about just dialogue, and just, like, like, we have a lack of, I mean, like, I think processes that allow for, like, processes and spaces that allow people to, like, safely engage in conflict is essential in any democracy, right? Like, I think disagreements among people are seeds of really important ideas that, like, promotes creativity and just, like, increases our ability to address challenges together. And, like, the lack of processes and spaces for people to engage in those disagreements, like, is is just not constructive. So yeah, that's kind of just what I've been thinking about.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far, and definitely like emphasizing Ashley and Alina's point about dialogue and how we need an ongoing conversation. And I feel like when I hear the word conversation, it's like the connotation is friendly and productive, and there's like an inherent intention to get something positive done, or to at least understand the other side. I feel like that's, like everyone here has said, like that's severely lacking in the way that our current political system works. Like I put in the chat, like an example, presidential debates and how wholly unproductive and performative they are at letting anyone know what the policies are or where their stances lie. The only thing presidential debates are good for are getting like 10-second sound bites. It's wholly useless, really. And it's so sad that we've all been like collectively bought into or have been coerced to buy into like this substanceless form of politics. And yeah, we really need dialogue. And definitely like emphasizing Chabu's point on possibly getting like a written piece from a different perspective that we might not all agree on, because would very much like some firsthand exposure.
Yeah, I mean, I want to see more of these types of treks. I think we can do treks on pieces of writing that CU members create. I think that's like an experiment on top of this experiment, but we should still do like articles that are more like established as well. Yeah, I mean, it's funny how if we really like continue to battle test, and well, we're documenting our findings as we go through these reflection sections, like we can really change how civic education is done, because our democracy and our democracy, as in the system itself, and then also our understanding of that system, is evolving constantly. Lee is one of the leading theorists on all this stuff, and I mean, his own thinking has evolved since he published a book in January of 2020. So how can we allow civic education to be so stale and so like and really just sanctioned by the duopoly? Who approves civic education funding? Who approves it? who approves the curriculum, right? So this is why Civics Unplugged is so important.
All right. Yeah. Definitely want to do one of these again. If anyone finds, I don't know, like an article that they really liked and want to do a trek on this, we can talk about doing it sometime soon. But thank you all so much for joining us, and I will see you soon. Bye.